Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. If you're joining us for the first time, if you're one of our new subscribers and our subscribers are going up all the time, let me welcome you and tell you that we are the UK's largest pro-marriage organisation. We represent tens of thousands of individuals and groups who support this thing, one man, one woman marriage. Yes, I know other things take place in society, and we know that sometimes, unfortunately, marriages don't work out, but actually, growing up with your married mum and dad is the best for adults, it's the best for children, and it's the best for society. And that fact is being attacked in every which way it can be these days, even to the degree of telling children that there's no such thing as man or woman, and you can decide which one of those you are. And that's something which is being proliferated more and more within the education system these days. And somebody who's dealing with that head on is the new director at the Family Education Trust. It's a real privilege to have as our guest today, Peter Williams. Peter, would you like to say hello to our viewers and our listeners?
Hello, great to be with you, and thank you very much for having me.
So tell me about yourself, Peter. Have you got family? You've got kids? What's going on?
Yeah, sure. So I worked for about 10 years as a human rights campaigner, as I would say. It was for Right to Life, which was founded by Phyllis Whitman.
Yeah, I know them.
Whitman was one of the great founders of the Right to Life movement in the United Kingdom. So I learnt quite a lot from her, and she was a great mentor. She sadly died in 2012. And after that, I continued with Right to Life as executive officer for about 8 years, so up until 2020. Then decided to leave in February 2020, which was the worst possible time to leave.
Yeah. Well, you didn't know, did you?
No, nobody could have known at that point. So anyway, I did, and in a way that was providential. I went into, I'd say, a portfolio career where I effectively engaged in project consultancy for various different organizations. And so if I went from there to being a campaign consultant for a particular political party, and then also, certainly locally, and then also I became the media and communications manager for the Anscombe Bioethics Centre. So at the same time, I was looking for something which was a bit more stable than that. It was great to have the flexibility of a portfolio career. But at the same time, I think I came back to the realization that actually stability is important as well. Certainly for the potential of forming a family, which I'd like to do in the near future. So I applied to apply to FET, the Family Education Trust, and was accepted as and appointed as director. So I'm delighted to be on board and to prosecuting the important mission of the FET now.
Absolutely right. And you're Catholic by faith, is that right?
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, FET, of course, it's not a faith-based organization. So much like Coalition for Marriage, you approach things from a secular evidence base. A lot of your supporters will have a faith background, as will a lot of ours. A lot of ours are atheists. They have no faith whatsoever.
That's right. I think it's really important to make the distinction between justification for a position that you hold in the public sphere and motivation for pursuing that position. So justification for me is always based on secular evidence. It's the thing that we all have in common, which is reason and empirical evidence. But when it comes to motivation, obviously my motivation very much as a Christian is based on my concern for other human beings, my belief in solidarity with my fellow human beings, and also the idea of prosecuting the common good for everyone. So that for me is always the animating spirit behind it, which will be based partly on rational grounds, partly on religious grounds in my terms of my own personal motivation. But ultimately what we're using when we talk about debate in the public sphere is exactly that. It's the secular evidence, it's reason, it's the things that we all share in common. And that's what makes it any kind of claim really legitimate in a sort of democratic and liberal society.
Yeah, I think you put that really, really well. Peter, I want to cover just two quick things today. Something a little bit about the background of FET for those who are joining us for the first time. We do have new subscribers all the time, and for those who are joining us, might want to learn about FET. And then we'll talk about one of the issues which is really hot on your agenda at the moment, and that's what kids are being taught in school. But firstly, Peter, tell us a little bit about what is FET, what's its background, what does it do?
Well, FET's been around for about 50 years. We were founded in the 1970s by people who were very much concerned about the way that society was, regressing. I mean, a lot of people think of it as progress, but in fact, very much regress with a society that wants to be permissive, but in fact, the results of that are actually human wreckage. It's actually harming the family. It's harming the formation of the family. And so the mission of FET really has been, and since then, to establish and to carry on and promote research into the social, medical and psychological consequences of sexual behavior on the one hand, but also research the family founded on marriage. and to disseminate and promote that information and inform public debate and public discussion on that.
That's great. And of course, one of your former director, Norman Wells, was one of our own trustees here at the Coalition for Marriage, and we love him and miss him greatly. And it's great to have somebody like you welcome on board to take that wonderful work forward, because there's no time like the present that needs it as much, so that's absolutely marvelous.
Absolutely. I would say that the mission of the FET has never been more relevant. And so that's why I'm really passionate about prosecuting its mission going forward.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job. Seeing you on GB News, you've been about the place, being quoted here, there, and everywhere. So absolutely fantastic work. Keep it up. It's brilliant. Now, one of the things which is you've joined at a really poignant time from the point of view of FET's history and its work, because FET has always spoken about safeguarding for children, and it's always been a primary concern. And there are a lot of criticisms of what's going on in schools, that actually it's doing the opposite to safeguarding children, and that we're actually harming them in many, many ways by many of the things that we're talking about. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in schools that we should be troubled about, and what you at FET are doing about it.
Well, I think what we are seeing at the moment, and it's particularly concerning, is the institutional capture of schools, in fact, the entire education sector, from schools right up into the Department of Education, which on its website promotes all sorts of resources from various organizations, including Stonewall and the like, that are really promoting a form of gender ideology, and they're also promoting various kinds of prescriptions with regards to sexual behavior and sexual lifestyle that are not actually good for people, not good for children, not good for human flourishing. So that's the kind of thing we want to draw attention to at the moment, and simply say, this is really not something which is in keeping with precisely that safeguarding. I mean, 20 years ago, the idea of having drag queen story hour, for example, in nursery schools, which is something I've come up against, that would be seen as a clear example of a safeguarding issue. Now it's seen as something which can be actively prescribed by local authority education organizations. That really is quite troubling, quite disturbing. But I think the key thing here is that what we have is an education sector which has been so captured that we're seeing relationship to sex education affected by this, wherein people are told, well, children are told, well, this can be your identity. You can identify as, a man if you're a woman, or a woman if you're a man, or even to the extent of saying, as we found recently in one particular week, we had a cluster of cases where children were actually talking about being furries, this idea that they are identifying as certain animals. And what we get at the FET, we get stories from people, individual parents, who relate to us their children's experience in school. I mean, we had one particular case where a lady had two sons, one I think in the fifth form, one in the third form. So that's year 11, year 9. And they had girls in both their years who identified, either had some kind of gender dysphoria, or were presenting as having some kind of gender dysphoria. It doesn't necessarily they had it. But certainly also, I think 3 of them at the very least identified as furries. So there was one girl who, for example, refused to wash, saw her body as an ecosystem like an animal. And of course, I can invite you to think about what the personal consequences of that are, including for the people around her. But that's the kind of thing that is being shown as, oh, well, we can't challenge this. We can't say maybe that's unhelpful, maybe that's wrong. No, this is their identity and that is sacrosanct. Well, that's not a good approach to relationship education. It's not good for PSHE. It's not good for forming children. It's not good for safeguarding. It's not good in any way. And yet this has become a standard ideology within the system. So I think it is important that what we can do about that, I think, on an individual level, apart from challenge it. And I think a lot of people are quite wary of doing so because of what that will do to their personal reputation. They'll be identified as maybe a transphobic bigot and the like. But there's a way of handling that shows actually your genuine concern for children, your genuine concern for their flourishing. But I think the other thing, of course, that a lot of people could do, and a lot of parents should do, I think, is become the governors of schools. This is where those kind of policies really are made, and the change really is made. And I think it's only if we sort of abdicate the system, it's only if we abdicate these sorts of important civic roles, that this sort of thing will just continue to be prosecuted and to carry on. So whilst there's been some actually quite encouraging signs from the government that they want to officially discourage this, if not actively ban it in certain cases, whilst I think that's going on, that doesn't mean we can simply rest on our laurels. I think we have to say, no, there really has to be a much greater involvement of parents within the system. And what we'll be championing at FET, although we're not a campaigning organization, we're very much a research institute that's trying to inform the general conversation. But I think what we would do is encourage all kind of parents to, like I say, become governors, get involved, make sure that you are showing your views and your opinions and your principles there in the public sphere, because it's in the absence of that that this kind of corruption can flourish badly and can harm children.
Yeah, it makes. And I just want to pick up on some of that stuff, because a lot of people listening will think, well, you know, my kids aren't being exposed to that. Is this just kind of a niche thing in a couple of activist schools? It's nothing really for the mainstream to worry about. You know, governors just need to sort this out in local schools.
Well, again, that I think would be a form of complacency. I think what we need to be saying is, this is clearly much more widespread than people think. I don't think a lot of people, certainly, I mean, I'm a millennial. I think even people of my generation wouldn't appreciate the extent to which this is spread within schools, within the kind of society in which children exist, their own kind of society, that's to say, within their own generation. This is kind of a widespread understanding, it seems. It's becoming more widespread. And there is a degree to which what we actually have here is a kind of social contagion, where children think this is kind of cool, and therefore it adds to their social sort of credit if they develop these kind of identities. I think that's more the case probably with regards to sexual identity and gender identity than it is with furries. I think that may be somewhat unusual, but still it's there. Nonetheless, I think it's not something to be complacent about at all. And my key concern here is actually more with gender ideology, because whilst it would be a short-term, I think, embarrassment and possibly harmful, but not directly or as long in such a long-term way that someone has a sort of furry identity. I think more with regards to gender ideology, if children are being encouraged to think of themselves as transgender, that is to say, if they have a sexual gender dysphoria, if they're encouraged in that, then the consequence could be quite dire, whether it be something that leads them into some irreversible actions in their 20s, or even if it's something which is people are trying to encourage them to do right now. The idea of having irreversible surgery, the idea of having puberty blockers, those sorts of things really do need to be looked into. That if this is happening, this needs to be stopped. But ultimately, the fact that that's even a danger shows that this kind of ideology needs to be combated on the school level as well as on the political level. And therefore, any parent who says, well, it won't happen to my child, I would really discourage them from sort of taking that for granted. I think that you really need to be vigilant about what is happening within your child's school, within your local community, organize with other parents, and make sure that this is something which is not going to negatively affect the people around you.
And is this, I mean, it's quite a new phenomenon, the trans stuff, but is it new actually at all? Because I think it was about 20 years ago, we repealed something called Section 28 of the Local Authority Act, which said that you can't teach any LGBT stuff to young children in schools. And ever since then, we've had, an increase in teaching about, gay sex and what that involves to ever younger children, and all sorts of, it's okay to have sexual desires which are contrary to your biology. And that evolves into something like this trans stuff. And while I absolutely agree with you that the whole medicalization of this should be outlawed straight away, because, the evidence seems to say that it has very, very bad effects on children. And if left alone, most of them would grow up as perfectly normal, biologically identifying children as they were born. So absolutely, that should be outlawed. But the whole kind of issue of indulging and teaching kids things which actually might confuse them from a young age has been going on for a long time. And we spoke to David Payton, guy from Nottingham University, who you may well know, FET know him. And he's a guy who, an industrial economist, and he's done lots of studies that indicate, look, the more we teach children about sex, the more sex they will have. And the more we teach them about different types of sex, well, hey, the more different types of sex they'll have. So I'm wondering if we're looking at the fruits here, which is medicalization of this trans phenomenon, but actually the roots go much deeper.
No, I would agree with that. I think there is an ideological basis for all of this. And whilst there are some people who would want to say that the LGB and the T are not necessarily connected, in many ways they're not actually, I do think there has been an ideological connection to a lot of this, and the promotion of lifestyles that are not in keeping with our nature as human beings and therefore are flourishing as sexual beings, as human sexual beings. That is problematic, hugely problematic, and also needs to be challenged. The problem is, of course, is that it has been presented that if you do try to challenge this, then you must have some kind of unhappy prejudice, rather than thinking through, well, hang on, maybe we do actually have to have a much better account of what it means to flourish as a sexual being, as a human sexual being. What is it within our humanity that means, yes, now you're truly flourishing? That objective idea of sex, the idea that there may be something that, yes, can be evaluated and judged within sexuality, has been sort of excluded from contemporary thought and discussion. And so that would make sex unique amongst all the various different faculties that we have. We talk a lot, for example, about how we can flourish as human beings who eat. We've talked very much about health, and that's very much something which is introduced into schools. Of course, it should be. But why would we think that the sexual faculty is any different from our faculty of eating? That makes absolutely no sense. So I actually do think there is much room for prescription about what does make for better lifestyle, a better chance as well, particularly of forming a family, which is of course very much the animating principle of the FET. That needs to be something which we take a lot more seriously. So this is a discussion that needs to be had, but I think unfortunately is being suppressed artificially by an ideology that we find amongst our media and political class. It says there can be no judgment of sexual lifestyle. There can be no judgment of what you do with your relationships. Well, no, actually, there absolutely has to be in this area of life, as in literally every other area of life.
I mean, you're absolutely right. And you raised a fantastic point there that, we're happy to teach children good foods to eat and foods that they shouldn't eat too much of, because actually getting too overweight is not good for you. And that doesn't mean you have any prejudice or you judge people that are overweight. Absolutely not. But it just means that, if you want to live an old and healthy life, the evidence says actually you need to look at what you eat because it's meaningful. And you're in exactly the same way. The evidence says that if you grow up with your married mum and dad, you do way better in life than in any other relationship. The evidence says that if you save sex for marriage, your marriage will be better. You and your wife or your husband will live long and prosper, as they say, in terms of outcomes. Now, we know on a population basis, there will always be examples on either side where it's a little bit different, but on the population basis, that's the way it works. And let me just make the point as well that I understand personally, I come from a single parent background, that sometimes these things don't work out. And we've got to recognize that. And we've got to be respectful of people from all backgrounds and not to be prejudicial. But nevertheless, we should be teaching kids the things that if all people did would lead to the flourishing of society. But we just don't seem to even be mentioning that in schools these days.
No, exactly. And of course, it's entirely compatible to say that, the fact that there are people who lead various different kinds of lifestyles or come from various different family backgrounds or have varying different sexualities does not make any difference to their human dignity, that you should be treating everyone with respect and care. Those are entirely good things that are taught, and they're entirely compatible with saying, and yet also, there is a best case scenario here as to family formation, as to the way that you prosecute your sexual and relationships. Anything like this, there can be an evaluative means of saying this is better, and this actually has this has bad consequences. So there is a way of doing that, and it's very strange that a lot of people lack the intellectual and I think also emotional and moral imagination to be able to realize that. So it's something which we need to uphold. It's something which we need to be able to say, this can be done. It should be done. And it should be done by anyone who really is genuinely concerned about objective human flourishing, rather than simply the indulgence of those who want to have their lifestyles completely unchallenged within the public sphere.
Yeah. I think that the problem is fear. Now, I'm regularly contacted. I have the privilege of going up and down the country, Peter, and talking to thousands of our supporters. And what I get from them is that actually there's a fear culture out there. Parents are too afraid to speak up. Teachers are too afraid to speak up because they'll get fired, because the mob will come for them. Now, if teachers don't teach the value of marriage and sexual restraint, no one's going to send a mob after them. But if they dare teach that stuff and say, actually, there might be a better way to live your life, the mob certainly will come, and they will end up getting fired, because often those in management are too weak to deal with the consequences and stick up for them. And this is the problem that we've got. So, one of the solutions and in fact, we look at the news almost on a weekly basis now, where people have stood up and said no, and they have objected, and they have been fired, and they have gone through the courts, and the courts have said actually they were within their rights to do that and to say that. And so I'm hoping that old Overton window is shifting a little bit, and people are able to actually speak up for what they know is true and evidence. And I'm just wondering, so you've mentioned, let's be governors. And if people can do that, that's great. I'm just wondering what else we can encourage people to do, if there's anything.
Well, I think being honest and clear about your opinions is generally a good thing. We had a talk at our conference recently in June, which I encourage everyone to come to next year, which will be in 2024. It'll be around central London, but I encourage everyone to come. One of the talks we had was by Harry Miller of Fair Cop. And he's someone who deals a lot with the closing down of the freedom to speak, as I put it. I mean, I think we have to be careful about the term freedom of speech. Freedom of speech really means the government either trying to shut you down or allowing you to speak freely. Freedom to speak is the freedom that we have as individuals to be able to give our opinions and to manifest our beliefs within the public sphere without being penalized, without being unjustly discriminated against, such as by being fired or by being in some way limited, or by being, for example, having our bank account shut down, as we're finding recently. Those sorts of things. That's the freedom to speak. It's a matter of civil rights as opposed to much more basic civil liberties. And I think that's something that his organization is very much dealing with. And of course, if you look into Fair Cop and you look at the history of what was happening to him, he's done a very good job, Harry Miller, of making sure, carving out certainly that the police can't interfere with you in a way that would be actually very disadvantageous to you on a civil level. And that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of organization that can also support those who really want to speak out. But I think mainly you don't necessarily need to be overtly brash about, the opinions that you have. I think often what you can do is simply, in a very calm and quiet and considered way, engage in ordinary civic life and make sure that you organize with other people of like mind to make sure that some of the bad proposals that are there, some of the bad ideas that there are discouraged and simply defeated. So that's why I encourage people to become governors, and also local politicians and all sorts of other areas, wherever you feel you can contribute as an individual. Right. And that will be different from each individual. Everyone is different. Everyone has their skill sets. Everyone has something to contribute. And I would simply say, find out how you can contribute in the best possible way, and then contribute as best you can. If you do run into someone trying to cancel you, quote unquote, then people like Harry Miller and Fair Cop are there to help you in that regard. And of course, people like us, FET, are there to help inform you. But I'd also encourage people to, where they do see bad examples, where they see examples of where there is bad RSHE, for example, or where someone is engaging in a way that would be harmful when it comes to gender ideology or sex education or any of these things, please do tell us. Please do come to FET and let us know that kind of thing, because it's actually in having those individual anecdotes and then seeing the patterns of those anecdotes across society that we're able to do our own research and identify what would be actually the best kind of research to engage in, and actually point this out and bring it to public knowledge so that there can be a better informed public debate. That's what we're really all about. And we can only do that if people tell us what's going on. So please do get in touch and inform us, because it's really hugely helpful.
A great idea, Peter. And the other thing, we interviewed a lady called Kimberly Ells, who wrote a book called The Invincible Family. And one of the things she highlighted in that book was how the Hungarian communist regime fell. And she said it was just ordinary people talking to their children. And what they would say when they came home from the communist school, where they learned what the state was teaching them, they would talk to them. And they would say, actually, once they got of an age that they could trust them, not to go and shop their parents to the state, which of course was a big threat back then. They would talk to them and they would say, what did you learn today? Well, we're going to tell you the truth. And the idea that as parents, actually, it's also our obligation to keep an eye on what our kids are being taught and to actually gently correct them and tell them the truth. And don't let them grow up thinking one thing without any other conversation entering their lives. So there is that need as parents just to maintain that watchful relationship. It's our job. We are the primary educators. Whatever the state might try and tell us, they're our children,
Absolutely.
And it's quite remarkable. Good. Listen, it's such a privilege to talk to you. We'll have you back again at some point. Hopefully other topics will be able to be discussed, but at the moment, this is a key critical thing. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Thank you for all the work FET is doing. And thank you for your time today. Peter Williams, what a real privilege.
Thank you. And thank you for your work too.